whatever deal I think President Trump has created in his head probably is not a deal that Xi Jinping is ready to deliver.
American and Chinese officials have been meeting in London today as part of the effort to tackle the trade war. Donald Trump held a reset with China last month and spoke to his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping, last week. Let's talk to Elizabeth Economy, who's the Hargrove Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and a former senior advisor on China in US Commerce Department during President Biden's administration. Elizabeth, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much, John. Great to be here.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for coming. What is the significance to you of this meeting in London?
Well, to be frank, I think we'd hoped that they wouldn't be meeting quite this soon, but that they would be working on a more substantive overall trade agreement, over the course of the 90-day tariff pause that, happened last month. But instead, this is really an emergency meeting because for the United States, China has been withholding export licenses for seven rare earth elements and magnets that are essential for our technology and defense industries. And on the Chinese side, of course, they've become quite concerned because the United States has put export controls on the Huawei Ascend chips. We have this big move now out of our State Department to revoke visas for certain Chinese students who are studying in the United States. And we also have some new controls on computer software that's used to design chips for China. So, we've come back to the table, I think, much sooner than we'd hoped, and not for, I think, the good reasons that everybody would have desired.
Right. Now, we heard President Trump at the end of last week, didn't we, telling the world that he'd been talking to President Xi and he as good as had a deal with China. Doesn't sound like you. I can hear you laughing. You don't quite believe that.
No, I mean, whatever deal I think President Trump has created in his head probably is not a deal that Xi Jinping is ready to deliver. But then again, of course, we saw the deal with your own country, with the UK, that was a great big deal, but actually everybody recognized was a small deal. But nonetheless, we were all happy to have it because it resolved the tensions and it moved us forward. This is not going to be any sort of great big deal. This is going to be a deal just to address these very specific concerns on the part of each country. But there's no sense in which our negotiators have been meeting and discussing and working toward any kind of larger framework deal.
What are global markets to make of this, Elizabeth? I mean, at one moment the president's saying, "Look, everything's fine. The sun's coming out. We got a deal, not just getting close to one, but we got a deal." And then it seems that's not the case. I mean, how is this going to affect the markets?
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of the boy who cried wolf, right? In the sense that, sometimes you have somebody who's alarmist all the time and then proves not to be true. We have the opposite situation where the president says great things are going to happen and they don't materialize. That being said, of course, I think the markets are probably already baking in at least a reduction in the tensions. Probably the Chinese will agree to relax the sort of licensing restrictions for the rare earth elements and minerals. And, we may make some concession on our side. But it's going to be enough just to take the temperature down. But I think at this point, we realize that we don't know what President Trump might do next that's going to stir the pot and cause, again, tensions to rise.
Tell me then, in your view, the British government seemed to be quite pleased just to be staging this event, these talks. Do you think it will weigh in some way with America when it comes to sealing a deal with Britain? Just making clear and final. I'd be fine
if UK negotiators, wanted to offer their thoughts and advice to the American team. But frankly speaking, I think the American team knows what it needs to do, what it needs to get done. I think if the UK, frankly, had a lot of experience successfully negotiating with the Chinese, then perhaps that would be of some utility. But I don't know whether or not somehow the UK has struck the brilliant deal with China that President Trump wants to find and can offer that kind of advice. In the meantime, I think this team knows what they need to get done over the next, 24 to 48 hours.
And I'm listening to you now. I mean, you don't assert a great deal of store in the idea that a deal that is announced by the president is going to hold for very long necessarily at all. I mean, we see now the news that Washington is telling London, will do not let China build its embassy in London where it wants to, which is an important site in London within range of the city, the financial businesses and so on, which America says are capable of being spied on. I mean, how concerned should the British government be about entreaties like that from Washington?
Look, I think, every country has to make its own determination of what constitutes its national security. I do think that the Trump administration and Trump 1 sounded the alarm bells in some pretty important ways about Chinese sort of espionage. And frankly, we built upon work that the Australians had done. And slowly but surely, European countries came around to the US way of thinking. If London determines that, in fact, the siting of this embassy does perhaps enable a degree of Chinese espionage that they previously hadn't had in some critical aspects of UK and American, information, then maybe they should take a step back. Hopefully, they won't simply reject it because it's coming out of the Trump administration.
Let me just ask you this, Elizabeth, as an American, because we're covering, as you'd expect, the story of what's going on in the streets of Los Angeles, with law enforcement facing off against protesters, with troops being called in by the president over the head of the state governor, who says this is an attempt by the president to stir chaos, a deliberate political tactic. And I was talking a moment ago to a Republican Party donor who said this was basically part of a nationwide far left plot to destabilize the government. What is your take on it?
And look, I think that last point is of course ludicrous. I think that there is a significant divide in this country about how we should manage the issue of undocumented migrant, workers. And the Trump administration has, one approach that is soundly rejected, I would guess, by a majority of Americans. And so what you're seeing now is that playing out in the city of Los Angeles. But we've seen it play out in other cities, and we've even seen in some red states, in some Republican towns, great dismay when ICE has come in and removed people that have been part of the community for decades, responsible and well-liked members of the community, and removed them, under the cover of darkness. And people are protesting that. And that's even in red states and red towns. So I think this is the American people telling this administration that this is not something that the American people want. Hopefully this is going to be resolved quickly. Because, of course, this kind of chaos that we see in the streets is nothing that anybody wants.
All right, Elizabeth Economy, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much.